My life was a grid. A perfectly aligned, predictable system of lines and spaces designed for maximum efficiency and minimum emotional turbulence. I was a graphic designer, so the metaphor was apartment. From my minimalist apartment, where every book was spine out and alphabetized, to my rigidly structured workday, I had built a fortress of routine. It was a safe place, quiet and orderly. It was also profoundly lonely, a fact I acknowledged only in the deep hours of the night when the city's hum felt like a conversation I was not invited to. Julian was the chaos. He was the beautiful, unpredictable variable that threatened the integrity of my entire system. He was an architect, his firm 2 floors above mine in the same glass and steel tower that dominated our corner of the city. I did not know him, not really. But I knew the architecture of him. I knew the broad, confident set of his shoulders under a well-tailored jacket and the solid column of his neck. I knew the way his dark hair fell across his forehead when he was concentrating on his phone, and the absent-minded gesture he used to push it back. He was a work of art I was content to admire from a distance, a masterpiece in a museum of my own making. He was placed on a pedestal, bathed in the warm light of my assumptions. Confident, successful, and, of course, completely unattainable. The primary exhibit was labeled "Straight Man Living His Best Life." I had seen him on the phone in the lobby, his head tilted back in a genuine, rumbling laugh that echoed slightly in the cavernous space. I had heard him mention a weekend trip to the coast, his voice full of an easy warmth I was certain was reserved for a wife, or at least a very serious girlfriend. He was a closed loop, a finished design, and I was merely an observer from the gallery. This observation had become its own quiet routine. The 8:15 elevator ride, where I would stand in the back corner and study the reflection of his worn leather briefcase in the polished steel doors. The 10:30 coffee run, where he would order a black Americano, his voice a low, steady sound that vibrated through the floor. I cataloged these details like precious artifacts. The scent of his cologne, a subtle and expensive mix of what I guessed was sandalwood and something sharp and clean like bergamot, would sometimes linger in the elevator long after he had exited on the 12th floor. It was an olfactory ghost, a reminder of a presence that was both overwhelmingly real and frustratingly out of reach. My feelings for him were kept in a locked room inside my head, a secret archive. They were safe there, causing no disruption to the outside world. I could indulge in the quiet ache of wanting him without any of an actual relationship's messy, unpredictable risks. It was a one-sided conversation, a silent and devoted correspondence where I was the only participant. I had constructed such high, thick walls around this part of myself that the idea of them ever coming down was laughable. I was the curator of my own solitude, and Julian was just the most beautiful piece in my collection of things I could never touch. He was a fixed point in my daily orbit, a distant star whose light I navigated by, never once dreaming I might actually get closer. The distance was the point. The distance was the safety. And then the sky broke open. It was a Tuesday in late autumn, the kind of day that could not decide if it wanted to be gray or brilliant. By 5 o'clock, it had chosen violence. The rain did not just fall, it assaulted the city. It came down in thick, wind-driven sheets that turned the windows of our office building into cascading waterfalls. The lights flickered once, twice, a tremor of the overworked power grid. A collective groan went through our open-plan office. The storm was not just a storm. It was a disruption, a snarling, chaotic force tearing through the carefully laid grid of 1,000 evening commutes. I packed my laptop, my movements precise and deliberate, a small act of defiance against the elemental rage outside. My plan was simple: brave the 2 blocks to the subway, accept my fate as a drowned rat, and retreat to the sterile safety of my apartment. But when the elevator doors opened onto the lobby, the plan dissolved. The revolving doors were a frantic carousel of people darting out and immediately retreating, their faces a mixture of shock and resignation. The street outside was not a street anymore. It was a shallow, fast-moving river. My phone, I discovered with a familiar pang of self-reproach, was dead. Of course it was. I had forgotten to charge it after a long client call. No rideshare app. No way to check the transit alerts that were undoubtedly screaming about system-wide delays. I was marooned. I found a relatively dry spot under the building's grand awning and joined the small, huddled crowd of fellow castaways. The air was thick with the smell of wet pavement and ozone. That was when I saw him. Julian. He was standing a few feet away, shoulders hunched against a sudden gust of wind that sent a spray of rain skittering across the granite. He was not wearing his usual jacket, just a crisp white shirt, now soaked through at the shoulders and cuffs. He looked less like a masterpiece and more like a man, frustrated and mortal. He was staring at his own phone, a scowl on his face that I had never seen before. It made him look younger, more accessible. It was a crack in the marble. For a long time, we just stood there, two strangers united by a shared inconvenience. The silence between us was not awkward, just present. It was filled by the cacophony of the storm. Then, with a frustrated sigh, he shoved his phone into his pocket and stepped to the edge of the curb, his arm raised with an authority I could never dream of summoning. He was trying to hail a taxi, an act of supreme optimism in the face of the apocalypse. One after another, the yellow cabs sped past, their rooftop lights defiantly off. My heart was doing a frantic, stupid tap dance against my ribs. A part of me, the sensible, orderly part, willed him to fail. If he got a cab, he would disappear, and the status quo would be restored. But another part, a smaller, traitorous part, watched his determined silhouette against the gray deluge and hoped. And then, a miracle. A taxi, its light a beacon of glorious hope, slowed and pulled over. Julian opened the back door, a wave of relief washing over his features. He started to get in, then he stopped. He turned. He looked directly at me. His eyes, which I had only ever seen in passing, were a deep, thoughtful brown. They met mine, and for a second, the entire world seemed to fall silent. The roar of the storm, the hiss of tires on wet asphalt, it all faded away. There was only his gaze, questioning and direct. "Where are you headed?" he called out over the rain, his voice that same low rumble, but now it was directed at me. At me. My own voice felt trapped in my throat, a rusty and used thing. I managed to croak out the name of my neighborhood. A small, almost imperceptible nod. "I'm going uptown, right past there. Get in. We can share." It was not a question. It was a calm, simple instruction. An offer of sanctuary. My mind, the fortress builder, the curator of quiet loneliness, screamed 1,000 warnings. This is a breach. This is a violation of protocol. This is chaos. But my body, cold and damp and tired of being alone, moved before I could stop it. I took a step, then another, and slid into the back of the taxi beside him. The door slammed shut, and the world outside was instantly muffled, the violent roar of the storm reduced to a rhythmic drumming on the roof. The inside of the cab was a small, self-contained world. It was dark and warm and impossibly close. The air was heavy with the scent of wet wool from our coats, the faint, chemical smell of the air freshener dangling from the rearview mirror, and something else. Underneath it all was his scent, sandalwood and bergamot, amplified by the humidity and the heat of his body. It was everywhere, a dense, intoxicating cloud that filled my lungs with every breath. My carefully constructed walls were not just breached, they were flooded. I sat rigidly, my hands clasped in my lap, trying to occupy as little space as possible. But the car was small, and he was a large man. His shoulder was a solid presence, just inches from mine. His thigh, encased in dark, damp trousers, was a line of heat running parallel to my own. I could feel the warmth radiating from him, a stark contrast to the chill that had settled deep in my bones. I was hyper-aware of every tiny movement, every shift of his weight, every quiet breath he took. My entire universe had shrunk to the space of that worn vinyl seat. He gave the driver his address, then gave a cross street near my apartment. His voice was calm, steady, an anchor in the swirling chaos of my internal monologue. I murmured my thanks, the words sounding thin and inadequate. "Don't mention it," he said, turning to look at me. In the dim light of the cab, filtered through the rain-streaked windows, his face was all shadows and planes. "Looked like you were stranded. My phone died," I admitted, feeling the need to explain my helplessness. It felt like a confession of some deeper incompetence. He offered a small, sympathetic smile. "Mine's about to. And there's no way I was walking in this." The conversation stalled there. We lapsed back into silence, but it was different now. Before, outside, It had been the anonymous silence of strangers. In here, it was charged, thick with unspoken things. The city crawled by outside the fogged-up windows, a blurry watercolor of bleeding neon lights and brake lights. The rhythmic thump-thump of the windshield wipers was like a slow, unsteady heartbeat. Then, the taxi lurched. It hit a pothole hidden by the flooded street, and I was thrown sideways, directly against him. It was not a brush. It was a solid, undeniable impact. My hand flew out to steady myself, landing squarely on his arm. Through the damp fabric of his shirt, his bicep was hard as a rock, a core of solid strength. For a split second, I was pressed against the entire length of his body, from shoulder to knee. The warmth was overwhelming, a sudden, shocking jolt of heat that shot through my system like electricity. I pulled back instantly, my face burning. "Sorry," I stammered, my heart hammering against my ribs. But he did not pull away. He simply shifted, turning his body slightly toward me. His hand came up and rested briefly on my shoulder, a steadying, reassuring weight. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low and concerned. His fingers were warm, and the pressure was firm. It was a simple, platonic gesture, but it felt like a brand. It was the first time he had touched me, really touched me, and my mind short-circuited. The museum glass had shattered. The artifact was touching me back. "Yeah, fine," I managed to say, my voice an octave too high. He removed his hand, but the warmth lingered, a phantom touch on my shoulder. He did not turn away. He kept looking at me, his expression unreadable in the gloom. The space between us suddenly felt both vast and non-existent. The traffic ground to a complete halt. Up ahead, we could see the flashing lights of an emergency vehicle painting the rain-slicked street in strobing blues and reds. Julian let out a long, slow breath. "Looks like we're not going anywhere for a while." He leaned his head back against the seat, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something other than calm confidence in his eyes. It looked like weariness, maybe even a hint of vulnerability. To fill the sudden, heavy silence, he started talking. "I hate storms like this," he said, his voice quiet, almost a confession. "My parents' house, when I was a kid. The basement flooded every time there was a big storm. We'd spend all night bailing out water with buckets." He gave a small, humorless laugh. "Guess I never really got over it." It was such a simple, human admission. A crack in the perfect facade of the man I had invented. He was not just the confident architect from the 12th floor. He was a kid who was afraid of flooded basements. The knowledge settled in my chest, a warm, heavy thing. It made him real. It made the ache of wanting him sharper, more painful, because it was no longer an ache for an idea, but for a person. A person sitting so close to me, I could count the drops of rain caught in his eyelashes. We sat there for what felt like an eternity, the taxi an island in a sea of stopped traffic. We talked, not about work or the weather, but about other things. He asked me what I did, and when I told him I was a graphic designer, he seemed genuinely interested. He asked about the kind of work I did, his questions smart and insightful. I found myself talking more than I had to anyone in months, the words tumbling out of me, clumsy and eager. He told me about a project he was working on, a community library, his passion for it evident in the way his voice changed, the way his hands moved as he described the flow of light through the reading rooms. The world outside the taxi ceased to exist. There was only this small, warm space, the sound of the rain, and the low rumble of his voice. The walls I had so carefully constructed around myself were not just breached, they were dissolving, washed away by the storm and the unexpected intimacy of this shared space. I was adrift, and for the first time in a very long time, I did not feel the need to find the shore. I was terrified, and I was hopeful. An hour crept by. The driver, a patient man with a weary face, finally turned around. "Big power line down up ahead," he announced to the cab. "Whole street is closed. Could be hours. I can try to turn around, but we will be in this for the rest of the night." A sense of dread, cold and familiar, washed over me. This was it. The bubble was about to burst. We would get out, say a polite, awkward goodbye, and tomorrow he would be back on his pedestal, behind the glass, and I would be back in my grid. The thought was unbearable. Julian looked out the window, then at me. His expression was thoughtful. "My place is only 3 blocks from here," he said, his voice quiet but clear over the drumming rain. "We could walk." He must have seen the hesitation, the sheer panic in my eyes. "Look," he added, his tone softening. "It's pointless sitting in here. Come up to my apartment. You can wait out the storm. I'll make coffee. Or I have whiskey. Something stronger than coffee." He gave a small, almost shy smile. "It's better than this." My mind was a civil war. The general of my anxieties was screaming orders. "Retreat. This is an unacceptable risk. The system cannot handle this variable." But the small, hopeful trader, the part of me that had been starved for connection for so long, was staging a rebellion. It saw the offer for what it was, a lifeline, a continuation of this strange, unexpected warmth. My mouth made the decision for me. "Okay," I heard myself say. The word hung in the air, a tiny, fragile thing. "Okay," he confirmed, a genuine note of relief in his voice. "Okay." The 3-block walk was a surreal journey through a wounded city. The rain had lessened to a steady, miserable drizzle. We walked under his umbrella, a large black one he produced from his briefcase. The space beneath it was even more intimate than the taxi. I was tucked against his side, his arm occasionally brushing mine. The heat from his body was a furnace against the damp chill of the night. We did not talk. There was nothing to say. The world was dark, punctuated by the flashing lights of emergency vehicles, and our footsteps echoed on the empty, glistening pavement. His apartment building was an old, handsome brick structure, the kind with a proper lobby and quiet, carpeted hallways. His apartment itself was on the 4th floor. As he fumbled with his keys, I felt a fresh wave of anxiety. I had imagined his home as a sterile, minimalist space, like a page from an architectural magazine. All concrete and glass in sharp angles, a reflection of the man I thought he was. He pushed the door open, and I was completely wrong. The apartment was warm, lived in, and deeply personal. The walls were lined with bookshelves that overflowed with books, art history, novels, poetry. A large, comfortable-looking sofa in a deep charcoal gray dominated the living room. There were plants, thriving and green, on the windowsill. It smelled of old paper, coffee, and faintly of him. It was a home. It was his home. "Sorry about the mess," he said, though there was no mess to speak of. "Make yourself comfortable. I'll get that coffee started." And then, as if on cue, the lights flickered, buzzed, and died. We were plunged into an absolute, profound darkness. The only light came from the city outside, the distant, strobing blues and reds, and the occasional, brilliant flash of lightning that illuminated the room in stark, ghostly detail. A beat of silence. Then, a low chuckle from the darkness where Julian was standing. "Of course," he said, his voice a disembodied rumble. "Just of course." I could hear him moving, the soft shuffle of his shoes on the hardwood floor. "Stay put. I've got candles." A moment later, a match scraped, and a small, flickering flame bloomed in the center of the room. He lit a few thick pillar candles on the coffee table, and the space was transformed. The flickering lights softened all the angles, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. It felt ancient and intimate, like we were the only two people in the world, huddled together against the dark. He abandoned the idea of coffee and retrieved the bottle of whiskey he had mentioned, along with 2 heavy glass tumblers. He poured a generous amount into each and handed one to me. Our fingers brushed as I took the glass, and the jolt was just as potent as it had been in the taxi. We sat on the sofa, not too close, but not far apart either. The silence that fell between us was different again. It was not awkward or charged. It was comfortable, companionable. We sipped our whiskey, the fiery liquid a welcome warmth in my chest. The storm outside seemed to be a living thing, its thunderous sighs and flashes of temper the only interruptions to our quiet sanctuary. The conversation from the taxi picked up again, easily, as if it had never stopped. We talked about everything and nothing. The city, our families, bad movies we secretly loved, dreams we had mostly abandoned. He had a dry, understated sense of humor that took me by surprise. He made me laugh, a real, unforced laugh that felt foreign in my own throat. I learned that the confidence I had so admired from afar was a carefully constructed shield, a professional necessity for a man who often felt he was just making it up as he went along. He learned that my quiet, orderly life was a defense mechanism against a world that often felt too loud, too chaotic, too much. The space between us on the sofa seemed to shrink with every shared story, every quiet laugh. I was acutely aware of him, of the way the candlelight caught the line of his jaw, the way he leaned forward when he was listening intently, the warmth of his presence beside me in the dark. The air grew thick with a tension that had nothing to do with the storm. It was a delicate, powerful thing, humming between us like a plucked string. He had just finished telling a story about a disastrous camping trip from his college years. The story ended, but the quiet that followed was heavy with unspoken energy. He did not lean back. He stayed leaning forward, his glass resting on his knee, and looked at me. His gaze was intense, searching. The museum was gone. The gallery was gone. The pedestal was gone. There was only Julian, a man made of warmth and shadows, looking at me as if he was seeing me for the very first time. "Leo," he said. "My name." He said it so quietly it was almost a whisper, but it landed in the silent room with the force of a shout. It was not just a name, it was a question, an invitation. He started to lean in, his movements slow, deliberate, giving me every possible chance to stop him, to turn away, to break the spell. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a wild, terrified bird beating its wings against a cage. Every instinct for self-preservation, every carefully programmed rule in my rigid system, screamed at me to move, to retreat to the safety of distance. I did not move. I stayed perfectly still, my breath caught in my throat. I watched as his face came closer, his eyes dark and serious, searching mine for a sign. And then his lips met mine. The first touch was impossibly soft, hesitant, and questioning. It was not a kiss of passion, but of exploration. It tasted of whiskey and rain and something that was just him. My carefully ordered world did not just shatter. It evaporated. It ceased to exist. In its place was only this. The dark room, the flickering candlelight, the roar of the storm outside, and the warm, gentle pressure of Julian's mouth on mine. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in my life, I let the chaos in. I leaned into it, my hand coming up to rest on his jaw, and I kissed him back. The morning came with a brutal, unforgiving clarity. Sunlight, sharp and white, streamed through the large windows, illuminating every dust mote dancing in the air. The power was back on. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was an alien sound. The magical, candlelit intimacy of the night before felt like a dream, a fantasy conjured by the storm and the whiskey. In the harsh light of day, everything felt raw and exposed. I had woken up on the sofa, a thick blanket tucked around me. I did not remember falling asleep, but I had a vague, hazy memory of the kiss deepening, of hands tangled in hair, of leaning against him until the world tilted and sleep took over. I sat up, my body stiff, my head thick with a mixture of alcohol and anxiety. Julian was in the kitchen. He was already dressed in a simple gray t-shirt and jeans. The t-shirt stretched taut across the broad expanse of his back and shoulders as he moved, and the sight sent a fresh wave of panic through me. He was too real, too solid. He was a fact, and I did not know what to do with facts. I only knew how to handle assumptions and distance. He turned, a coffee mug in each hand. He saw that I was awake, and for a fleeting second, I saw something in his eyes, uncertainty, maybe even fear, before it was quickly shuttered. He gave me a tight, polite smile that did not reach his eyes. "Morning," he said, his voice carefully neutral. I made coffee. He walked over and handed me a mug. His fingers brushed against mine, a brief, electric contact, and he pulled his hand back as if he had been burned. The casual warmth from the night before was gone, replaced by a chasm of awkward, unspoken tension. He retreated to the other side of the room, leaning against the kitchen counter, creating a physical distance that mirrored the emotional one that had sprung up between us. My anxiety, which had been a low hum, escalated into a deafening roar. My internal monologue started its vicious, familiar spiral. It was a mistake, a fluke. It was the storm, the darkness, the whiskey. A moment of weakness, of loneliness. He regrets it. God, he regrets it so much he can't even look at me. I took a sip of the coffee. It was black and strong, just like he ordered at the shop downstairs. The detail was a fresh stab of pain. "I've ruined everything," the voice in my head continued, relentless and cruel. "I've taken this fragile, one-sided thing I had, this safe admiration, and I've smashed it. Now it's just this horrible, awkward morning. He'll have to see me at work. In the elevator. It will be unbearable for him. I have to get out of here. He started talking about the weather. Looks like it's cleared up, he said, staring out the window. The news said the power line is fixed. Traffic should be moving again. Normal things. He was talking about normal, everyday things, as if the world had not fundamentally shifted on its axis last night. As if he had not kissed me. As if I had not kissed him back. His deliberate normalcy was, to my panicked mind, the ultimate confirmation of my fears. He was trying to erase it, to pretend it never happened. To put me, and what we did, back in a box and shelve it away. I should go, I said, my voice sounding strained and foreign. I placed the half-full mug on the coffee table and stood up, my movements jerky. I started gathering my things, my jacket, still slightly damp, my messenger bag. I just needed to escape. I needed to get back to my own apartment, to my grid, where I could try to piece together the shattered remains of my orderly life. I was at the door, my hand on the knob, my escape just a twist away. I was ready to flee back into the safety of my loneliness, to nurse this new, sharper ache in private. Leo, his voice stopped me. It was quiet, but it cut through the hum of my anxiety. I stopped, my back to him, unable to turn around. I braced myself for what was coming next. The gentle letdown. The I was drunk speech. The I'm not really apology. The let's just forget this happened plea. Wait, he said. There were footsteps, and then he was standing just behind me. I could feel his presence, the warmth of his body, even without touching. We need to talk. The words landed like stones in the pit of my stomach. The finality of them. This was it. The execution. I finally forced myself to turn and face him. I tried to arrange my face into an expression of polite understanding, to make it easier for him, but I was sure I just looked terrified. He was not looking at me with pity. He was looking at me with that same searching, serious expression from the night before. His hands were shoved into the pockets of his jeans, and his shoulders were tense. He looked as nervous as I felt. About last night, he began, and I flinched internally. This morning, I've been an idiot. That was not what I was expecting. He took a deep breath, like a man about to dive into deep water. I've wanted to talk to you for months, Leo. Properly talk to you. Not just morning in the elevator. My brain struggled to process his words. They did not fit the narrative I had already written for this conversation. I noticed you, he continued, his voice low and earnest. In the coffee shop. You have this way of concentrating. I don't know. I noticed. And I kept trying to figure out how to say something. Anything. More than hello. But I kept losing my nerve. He gave a short, self-deprecating laugh. The confident architect is actually a coward. He looked down at the floor, then back up at me, his gaze direct and unwavering. Last night, sharing the taxi, that wasn't a complete accident. I saw you standing there under the awning. I could have tried to get a cab from the other side of the street. But I waited. I was hoping for an excuse. An opportunity. The world tilted again. The events of the previous night replayed in my mind, but now they were cast in a completely different light. They were not a series of chaotic, random events. They were a possibility he had waited for. The kiss, he said, his voice dropping even lower. That wasn't a mistake for me. Not even a little bit. But this morning, I woke up and I panicked. I saw you on the couch, and I thought I'd completely misread everything. That I'd taken advantage of the situation, that you regretted it. You were so quiet, and I thought I'd scared you off, that I'd made things horrible for you. He was describing my own fear, my own anxiety spiral, but from his perspective. We had spent the morning trapped in the exact same prison of doubt, sitting in cells just across the hall from each other, each convinced we were in solitary confinement. A single, stupid question bubbled up from the wreckage of my assumptions. But, I thought you had a girlfriend. Or a wife. I blurted out, the words clumsy. You're always on the phone, laughing. A look of genuine confusion crossed his face, and then it cleared, replaced by a slow, spreading smile. A real smile this time, one that reached his deep brown eyes. My sister, he said, shaking his head. She's ridiculous. She has 3 kids under 5. She calls me to complain about them, and it's usually hilarious. My sister. Not a wife. Not a girlfriend. The entire foundation of my carefully constructed museum exhibit crumbled into dust. The pedestal, the labels, the impenetrable glass. It was all a fiction I had written myself. Relief, so potent and overwhelming it made me dizzy, washed through me. And with it came a surge of courage. The courage to tear down the last remaining wall. I didn't regret it, I said, my voice shaking slightly, but it was my own. Julian, I was terrified you did. I've been watching you. For months. I just thought you were so completely out of reach. I built this whole story in my head. And last night, it was everything. And this morning I was so sure I had imagined it all, that I had ruined the one good thing I had, even if it was just watching you from a distance. The confession hung in the air between us, raw and honest. It was the truest thing I had ever said to another person. The tension in his shoulders seemed to melt away. The relief on his face was a mirror of my own. He closed the remaining distance between us in a single step. He raised his hands, not quickly, but with a slow, deliberate grace, and framed my face. His palms were warm against my skin, his thumbs stroking gently over my cheekbones. You didn't ruin anything, he whispered. You just started something. And then he kissed me again. This kiss was nothing like the first. There was no hesitation, no question. It was sure and deep and certain. It was a kiss of profound, bone-deep relief, of shared confession and mutual understanding. It was the feeling of a lock clicking open, of a door swinging wide. It was not the chaos I had always feared. It felt like coming home. We did not go our separate ways. I did not retreat to my apartment, and he did not go back to his routine. The day belonged to us. We left his apartment and walked out into a city that felt washed clean, reborn after the storm. The air was crisp and cool, and the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. We walked for hours, with no destination in mind. We held hands. It was a simple, terrifying, wonderful thing. His hand was large and warm, his fingers laced through mine, a solid, reassuring anchor in a world that suddenly felt brand new and full of possibility. We talked. We really talked. Not just the hushed confessions of the night before, but the easy, sprawling conversations of two people discovering a new landscape in each other. I told him about the rigid systems I built to keep my anxiety at bay, and he did not see it as a weakness, but as a form of strength. He told me about the immense pressure he felt to live up to his father's legacy, the quiet fear of failure that dogged his every success, and I saw the vulnerability he kept so carefully hidden behind his confident exterior. We found a small cafe with outdoor seating and drank coffee in the bright afternoon sun. I watched the way he smiled when he talked about his nephews, the way his eyes lit up when he described the perfect angle of a roofline to catch the morning light. He watched me, too. I could feel his gaze on me, warm and steady, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel the urge to look away, to hide. I felt seen, truly seen. Later, as the sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of orange and pink, we walked past a taxi stand. A line of yellow cabs sat waiting, gleaming in the golden light. Julian stopped and turned to me, a slow, conspiratorial grin spreading across his face. "Need a ride?" he asked, his voice a low, teasing rumble. A laugh, genuine and effortless, escaped me. I leaned into him, resting my head against his shoulder for a moment, breathing in the familiar, wonderful scent of him. "No," I said, my voice full of a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. "I think I'm exactly where I need to be." That night, I went back to my own apartment. As I stood in the doorway, I saw it with new eyes. The alphabetized books, the perfectly aligned coasters, the minimalist furniture. It was not a fortress anymore. It was just a room. The silence was not the sound of loneliness. It was just quiet. A peaceful, expectant quiet, waiting to be filled. I had spent so long building walls to protect myself from the chaos of the world, from the messy, unpredictable nature of human connection. I had curated my life like a museum, keeping everything precious and untouchable behind glass. But the storm had come. It had shattered the glass and flooded the galleries. It had brought chaos, and with it, it had brought Julian. He had not destroyed my world. He had just opened a door I never knew was there. He had shown me that vulnerability was not a weakness to be defended against, but a bridge to be crossed. That love was not about finding a perfect, finished piece of art, but about the beautiful, messy, ongoing process of creating something new together. My life was not a grid anymore. It was a blank canvas, and I could not wait to see what we would paint on it.